The old farmhouse stood alone at the end of a dusty road, its weathered walls telling stories of decades gone by. Tom Miller, a retired factory worker of 72 years, lived there by himself since his wife passed away 5 years ago. His only companions were his old dog Rex and the endless fields of corn that stretched as far as the eye could see. One particularly cold autumn evening, Tom noticed something unusual in his fields. The corn stalks were bent in a perfect circle, and an eerie blue glow pulsed from within. Most people would have called the police or run away, but Tom had seen too much in his life to be easily frightened. With Rex by his side and his trusty flashlight in hand, he made his way through the damaged crops. The closer he got, the more his skin tingled with an strange energy that made his gray hair stand on end. As he pushed aside the final row of corn stalks, his breath caught in his throat. There, curled up in a small crater, was a child, but unlike any child he had ever seen. Her skin had a subtle purple tint that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, and where hair should have been, delicate tendrils that looked like thin crystal strands caught the beam of his flashlight, creating tiny rainbows in the darkness. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, by human standards. The alien child was wearing what appeared to be some sort of spacesuit, now torn and malfunctioning, with strange symbols flickering weakly across its surface. She was shivering, and Tom could see her breath coming out in small, glowing puffs in the cold night air. Rex, usually wary of strangers, whimpered and gently nudged the small figure with his nose. The child's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that looked like swirling galaxies. She tried to move but was too weak, making a sound that, despite being inhuman, Tom instantly recognized as a cry of fear and hunger. Without hesitation, Tom took off his warm jacket and carefully wrapped it around the shivering alien child. "It's all right, little one," he said softly, knowing she probably couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone would convey his meaning. "You're safe now." As he gently lifted her, she weighed almost nothing in his arms. The child clutched weakly at his shirt, her small fingers slightly longer than a human child's would be, with tiny bioluminescent spots that pulsed with her heartbeat. Looking up at the night sky, Tom saw no signs of spacecraft or any explanation for how this child had ended up in his cornfield. But he knew one thing for certain: someone had abandoned this little girl, and he wasn't about to do the same. "Come on, Rex," he said to his faithful companion. "Let's get her inside where it's warm. Looks like we've got ourselves someone who needs our help." As they walked back to the farmhouse, the alien child's galaxy-like eyes darted between Tom's kind face and Rex's protective stance beside them. For the first time since he'd found her, the fear in her expression began to fade, replaced by something that looked remarkably like hope. Tom didn't know the first thing about taking care of an alien child, but he knew what it meant to be alone in the universe. Sometimes, he thought, the family you need finds you in the most unexpected ways. Inside the warmth of his farmhouse, Tom gently placed the alien child on his old leather couch. The fireplace crackled nearby, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Rex settled himself on the floor next to the couch, his tail thumping softly against the wooden floorboards as he kept watch over their unusual guest. The child's strange spacesuit was damaged beyond repair, with parts of it crackling and sparking. Tom carefully removed the broken pieces, revealing simple clothing underneath that seemed to be made from a material that shifted colors like oil on water. Her purple skin felt cool to the touch, and Tom worried she might be suffering from hypothermia, if aliens could even get hypothermia. "You must be hungry," Tom said, heading to his kitchen. He returned with an assortment of foods, some bread, fruit, and a bowl of warm soup he'd made earlier that day. The alien child's galaxy eyes widened at the sight of the food, but she hesitated, her delicate crystal-like tendrils quivering slightly. Tom demonstrated by taking a small sip of the soup himself, then offered it to her. With trembling hands, she accepted the bowl and began to drink. The moment the warm liquid touched her lips, her bioluminescent spots glowed brighter, pulsing with what Tom hoped was pleasure rather than distress. As she ate, Tom noticed more details about his mysterious guest. Her fingers had slight webbing between them, and when she moved, her skin seemed to ripple with iridescent patterns. She couldn't have been alone for long. Her physical condition, while poor, wasn't critical. But who would abandon such a young child, human or otherwise? The alien girl finished the soup and reached tentatively for an apple. Before taking a bite, she held it up to her face, and to Tom's amazement, the spots on her fingers glowed brighter, scanning the fruit with some kind of natural bioluminescence. Apparently satisfied that it was safe to eat, she took a small bite, her face lighting up with wonder at the new taste. "Well," Tom said, settling into his armchair, "we need to call you something." He pointed to himself. "I'm Tom." Then to his dog, "That's Rex." The child watched him intently, then made a series of musical chirping sounds that Tom couldn't hope to reproduce. She seemed to realize this and looked frustrated for a moment before pointing to herself and making a shorter sound that sounded almost like "Lumi." "Lumi?" Tom repeated. The alien child nodded enthusiastically, her crystal tendrils catching the firelight and creating tiny rainbows across the room. Whether it was her real name or just something she thought humans could pronounce, it seemed fitting given her bioluminescent nature. As the evening wore on, exhaustion began to overtake Lumi. Her eyes started to drift closed, though she fought to keep them open, as if afraid everything would disappear if she fell asleep. Tom retrieved a soft blanket from the closet and tucked it around her. "Sleep now, little one," he said softly. "You're safe here." As Lumi finally drifted off to sleep, Tom sat in his chair watching over her, his mind racing with questions. How would he care for an alien child? What if whatever had abandoned her came back? What if government officials discovered her? But as he looked at her peaceful sleeping face, he knew one thing for certain: he would protect her, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Outside, the night grew deeper, and somewhere in the vast darkness above, secrets of Lumi's origins waited to be discovered. But for now, in this moment, she was just a child who needed help, and Tom was just an old man with enough love left in his heart to give it. The next morning, Tom woke up in his armchair to find Lumi already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Rex. She was running her glowing fingers through the old dog's fur, and wherever she touched, tiny sparkles of light danced across his coat. Rex lay there contentedly, clearly enjoying the strange but gentle attention. "Good morning," Tom said, stretching his stiff muscles. Lumi looked up and made a musical sound that he took to be her version of a greeting. Her galaxy eyes seemed brighter today, and her purple skin had a healthier sheen to it. After a simple breakfast of eggs and toast, which Lumi examined thoroughly with her bioluminescent scanning ability before eating, Tom knew they needed to address the practical matters of their situation. The torn spacesuit still lay in pieces by the couch, and Lumi would need proper clothes. Tom retrieved an old trunk from the attic, filled with things his wife had kept from when their daughter was young. Inside, he found some children's clothes that might fit Lumi. The alien child watched curiously as he pulled out a simple blue dress and a warm sweater. When Tom helped her try them on, something unexpected happened. The moment the clothes touched Lumi's skin, the fabric began to shimmer slightly, adapting to her body temperature and taking on a subtle iridescent quality. It seemed her unique biology affected everything she came in contact with. Later that morning, Tom decided to show Lumi around the farm. As they stepped outside, she initially cringed away from the direct sunlight, her crystal tendrils flattening against her head like a protective helmet. But after a few moments, they slowly lifted again, catching the light and creating beautiful prismatic patterns in the air around her. In the daylight, Tom could now see the full extent of the damage to his cornfield. The circular pattern where Lumi had landed was even more prominent, with stalks bent outward in a perfect radius. As they walked past it, Lumi stopped and made a series of sad, musical notes. She pointed to the sky, then made a pushing motion with her hands, followed by a falling gesture. "Someone pushed you out?" Tom asked, his heart heavy with understanding. Lumi nodded, her galaxy eyes filling with what looked like liquid starlight instead of tears. She held up 6 fingers, then pointed to herself and made another falling motion. 6 others like you? Tom guessed. They fell too? But Lumi shook her head and pointed up again. 6 had stayed up there, wherever they had come from. She had been the only one pushed out. Tom felt anger rise in his chest at the cruelty of abandoning a child, regardless of species. He knelt down to Lumi's level, looking into those strange, beautiful eyes. Well, you have a home here now, little one. For as long as you need it. Lumi's response was unexpected. She reached out and placed her small hands on either side of Tom's face. Where her fingers touched his skin, gentle waves of warm light pulsed outward, and suddenly his mind was filled with images, stars wheeling overhead, the feeling of falling through space, terror and confusion, then the warmth and safety she'd felt when he found her. She was sharing her memories, her feelings, in the only way she knew how. When she pulled her hands away, Tom had to wipe tears from his eyes. Rex pressed against their legs, sensing the emotional moment, and Lumi bent down to hug the dog tightly. Her crystal tendrils glowed with a soft, peaceful light. As they continued their walk around the farm, Tom noticed something remarkable. Wherever Lumi's bare feet touched the ground, tiny flowers seemed to spring up in her footsteps, blooming instantly in brilliant colors before fading away. She was changing his world in small but magical ways, just as he was changing hers. In the distance, a car engine rumbled on the main road, making Lumi freeze in fear. Tom knew they couldn't keep her hidden forever, but for now, he would do everything in his power to protect this extraordinary child who had literally fallen into his life. A week had passed since Lumi's arrival, and life at the farmhouse had fallen into a gentle routine. Each morning, Tom would find her in the garden, communing with the plants in her own strange way. Where her fingers touched the vegetables, they grew fuller and healthier, glowing faintly in the early dawn light. But their peaceful existence was about to be disrupted. It began with a black van driving slowly past the farm, something that never happened on their quiet road. Rex noticed it first, his ears perking up as he stood guard by the window. Lumi, who had been helping Tom prepare lunch, immediately dimmed her bioluminescent spots and hid behind the kitchen counter. "Stay here," Tom whispered, moving to the window. The van had stopped at the end of his driveway, and 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They carried what looked like scientific equipment, and one held something that was beeping steadily. Tom's heart raced. Had they detected Lumi's unique energy signature? He had known this day might come, but he hadn't expected it so soon. He looked back at Lumi, who was trembling slightly, her crystal tendrils flat against her head in fear. "Quick, little one," he said softly, "remember our hiding place?" Lumi nodded and quietly made her way to the old root cellar beneath the kitchen. Tom had prepared it days ago, just in case, lining it with blankets and stocking it with food and water. As he helped her down, she grabbed his hand, sending him a pulse of worried images, uniformed figures, clinical rooms, cold metal tables. "I won't let them take you," Tom promised, squeezing her small hand. "Stay quiet until I come get you." Rex positioned himself by the cellar door, ready to guard their secret. The doorbell rang just as Tom closed the hidden entrance. He took a deep breath, straightened his clothes, and went to answer it. The 2 men stood on his porch, their faces professionally blank. "Mr. Miller," the taller one asked, holding up a badge. "I'm Agent Wilson, and this is Agent Roberts. We're with a special scientific research division of the government. We've detected some unusual energy signatures in this area, and we'd like to ask you a few questions." Tom leaned against the doorframe, playing the role of a confused old farmer. "Energy signatures? Don't know anything about that. Just me and my dog here, living quiet." Agent Roberts held up his beeping device. "Our readings suggest otherwise, sir. Have you noticed anything unusual in the past week? Strange lights? Unexplained phenomena? Can't say that I have, Tom replied steadily. Though my neighbor Bob down the road was telling me about some weird weather patterns. Might want to check there. The agents exchanged glances. Would you mind if we took a look around your property? Agent Wilson asked, though it wasn't really a question. Actually, I would mind, Tom said firmly. If you have a warrant, that's one thing. But otherwise, I know my rights. I'm an old man who values his privacy. The agents seemed taken aback by his directness. After a moment, Agent Wilson handed Tom a card. If you notice anything unusual, please contact us immediately. It's a matter of national security. As the agents walked back to their van, Tom noticed something extraordinary. All around the house, the plants in his garden had grown considerably taller in the past few minutes, creating a natural screen that obscured the view of his property. In the root cellar, Lumi must have sensed the danger and used her abilities to protect their home. Once the van disappeared down the road, Tom rushed back to the cellar. He found Lumi curled up with Rex, her hands pressed against the earthen walls, from which faint pulses of light were still emanating. She looked up at him with worried galaxy eyes. It's okay, he soothed, gathering her into his arms. They're gone. But we'll need to be more careful now. As he held her, Tom's mind raced with plans. They would need a better hiding system, and he would have to find a way to shield whatever energy she was emitting. Above them, through the cellar's small window, a streak of light crossed the sky. Lumi pointed at it, making an urgent trilling sound. Tom didn't need her touch communication to understand, whatever, or whoever, had abandoned her was still up there. And now Earth's authorities were taking notice. 2 nights after the agent's visit, Tom woke to find the farmhouse bathed in an ethereal blue glow. Following the light, he found Lumi standing in the living room, her crystal tendrils fully extended and pulsing with intense light. Her galaxy eyes were fixed on something only she could see, and her hands moved in precise patterns through the air. Rex sat nearby, watching calmly as streams of light flowed from Lumi's fingertips, forming complex symbols in the air, similar to those that had flickered on her broken spacesuit. Tom realized she was writing something, using her own bioluminescence to create a language of light. Suddenly, from somewhere high above the farmhouse, a faint purple beam shot down through the clouds, connecting with Lumi's light display. Her symbols rearranged themselves, responding to the communication. Tom held his breath, watching this impossible conversation unfold. Lumi's face showed a mix of emotions, hope, fear, and something like determination. The exchange continued for several minutes before the purple beam abruptly cut off. Lumi's lights dimmed, and she swayed on her feet, exhausted by the effort. Tom caught her before she could fall. What was that, little one? Who were you talking to? Instead of using her touch communication, Lumi pointed to herself, then held up 6 fingers, the same gesture she'd made before when telling him about the others who had stayed behind. But this time, she added something new. She pointed to her heart, then to the sky, then drew her fingers across her eyes in what looked like a prisoner's mask. They're trapped up there? Tom guessed. Lumi nodded vigorously, then made a series of urgent chirping sounds. She touched his face, sharing quick flashes of images, a massive ship hidden behind Earth's moon, other children like her but wearing restrictive devices around their necks, tall figures in flowing robes performing strange experiments. The pieces started falling together in Tom's mind. Lumi hadn't been abandoned, she'd escaped. And now the others were reaching out to her for help. But before they could communicate further, Rex began barking at the window. Through the glass, they could see more purple beams sweeping the countryside, methodically searching. Lumi's communication had been detected. Tom quickly pulled the curtains closed. We need to move, now. He grabbed the emergency bag he'd prepared after the agent's visit and headed for the root cellar. But Lumi tugged at his sleeve, shaking her head. She pointed to the back door instead. Following her lead, they slipped out into the night, Rex close behind them. Lumi led them to the cornfield where she'd first landed. As they reached the center of the flattened circle, she placed her hands on the ground. Waves of bioluminescent energy pulsed through the soil, and suddenly the corn began to grow at an impossible rate, creating a dense natural dome over them. Inside their organic shelter, Lumi continued to manipulate the plants, weaving them tighter until they formed a living barrier that somehow blocked the searching beams. Tom watched in amazement as she worked, her power over nature far greater than he'd imagined. When she finished, she slumped against him, completely drained. He wrapped her in his jacket, just as he had on that first night. "Those people looking for you, they're not from Earth, are they?" Lumi shook her head. She touched his face one more time, sharing a final image, a vast facility where alien children from different worlds were being held, their unique abilities harvested for some unknown purpose. She had been the only one strong enough to break free, but now the others were counting on her. Tom looked down at this extraordinary child who had crashed into his life. What she was asking was dangerous, perhaps impossible. But as he held her small, trembling form, he knew he couldn't ignore the plight of the other children. "Well," he said softly, "looks like we've got some planning to do." Rex wagged his tail in agreement, and Lumi's crystal tendrils glowed with renewed hope. The quiet life they'd built was over, but a greater purpose was calling them. Dawn found Tom, Lumi, and Rex still hidden in their shelter of living corn stalks. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the woven plants, Tom noticed something remarkable. Where Lumi had manipulated the crops, they now bore fully grown ears of corn that glowed with a faint internal light. Her power wasn't just controlling plants, it was enhancing them, imbuing them with a portion of her own energy. This gave Tom an idea. "Lumi," he said quietly, "could you do this with other plants? Make them store your energy?" The alien child considered for a moment, then nodded. She placed her hand on a nearby stalk, and Tom watched as her bioluminescent energy flowed into it, creating a network of glowing veins throughout the plant. For the next hour, Lumi worked tirelessly, infusing plant after plant with her energy while Tom took notes on an old pocket notebook. His plan was beginning to take shape. If they could create a wide enough network of enhanced plants, they might be able to build a natural amplifier for Lumi's powers, one strong enough to reach the ship behind the moon. But their work was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Through gaps in their organic shelter, they could see not just one black van, but three, along with several military-style trucks. The government agents had returned in force. "They must have tracked the communication from last night," Tom whispered. Rex growled softly as armed figures began spreading out across the farm, carrying even more sophisticated scanning equipment than before. Lumi touched Tom's arm, sharing a urgent vision. If the agents found her, the alien captors would know exactly where to look. They needed a diversion, but it had to be big enough to confuse both Earth's authorities and the watchers in the sky. Tom looked at the glowing corn around them, then at his little alien child, and understood what needed to be done. "Can you make the plants release all that stored energy at once?" he asked. Lumi nodded, but her galaxy eyes were worried. She showed him another quick vision. The release would drain her severely, leaving her weakened for hours. "I'll protect you," Tom promised. "Rex and I both will." The old dog pressed against Lumi's side in confirmation, and her crystal tendrils glowed with trust. As the agents drew closer to their hiding spot, Lumi began to work. She placed both hands on the ground, and waves of light pulsed through the soil, connecting with every plant she had enhanced. The corn stalks began to vibrate, their stored energy building to a crescendo. Tom pulled Lumi and Rex close, shielding them as best he could. Just as the first agent was about to discover their shelter, Lumi released her hold on the stored energy. The result was spectacular. Every enhanced plant in the field released its stored bioluminescence at once, creating a massive dome of light that shot skyward. The agents were thrown back by the force of it, their equipment overloading in a shower of sparks. In the chaos that followed, Tom scooped up the exhausted Lumi and ran for the farmhouse, Rex leading the way. Behind them, he could hear shouts of confusion as the light show continued, the energy bouncing between plants in an increasingly complex pattern that would take hours to fade. They made it to the root cellar just as the first purple beams from space began sweeping the area, drawn by the enormous energy release. But thanks to Lumi's earlier modifications, the cellar was now lined with plants that absorbed and scattered any scan that came their way. As they caught their breath in their hiding place, Lumi managed to share one more vision with Tom, 6 points of light, pulsing in sequence. The other children had seen her signal. Now they just had to hope the next part of the plan would work. Rest now, Tom told her, cradling her as her eyes drifted shut. Tomorrow, we save your friends. Above them, through the cellar's small window, he could see the enhanced corn still shimmering with otherworldly light. The real challenge was still to come, but they had taken the first step, they had given the other children hope. The full moon hung low over the farmhouse as Tom made final preparations. After a day of rest, Lumi had recovered her strength, and now her crystal tendrils sparkled with determination. All around the property, the enhanced plants they had created glowed softly, forming a vast network of living energy. They had chosen this night carefully. The government agents had withdrawn to analyze the previous day's light show, and their surveillance equipment was still malfunctioning from the energy overload. It was now or never. Lumi stood in the center of the cornfield, where her remarkable journey on Earth had begun. She touched Tom's face one last time, sharing a vision of what was to come. The network of plants would act as an amplifier, allowing her to project her consciousness up to the ship. While her body remained on Earth, her mind would attempt to disable the restraints holding the other children. It's dangerous, isn't it? Tom asked, noting the fear behind her galaxy eyes. Lumi nodded but pointed to the sky with determination. She had to try, for the others. Rex positioned himself protectively at Lumi's side as she began. Her bioluminescent spots pulsed with increasing intensity, and the enhanced plants responded, their glow strengthening in waves that spread across the entire farm. Her crystal tendrils extended fully, catching and amplifying the light until she was at the center of a swirling vortex of energy. Suddenly, Lumi's body went rigid, her eyes blazing with starlight. Through their connection, Tom caught glimpses of what she was seeing: sterile corridors, locked chambers, and the 6 other children, each wearing devices that suppressed their unique abilities. They sensed her presence, their own inherent lights flickering in response. But they weren't alone. Tall figures in flowing robes rushed through the ship's corridors, alerted to the intrusion. They carried devices that crackled with suppressive energy, the same technology they used to contain their young prisoners. Tom watched helplessly as Lumi's physical form trembled with effort. On the ship, she was racing against time, using her understanding of the technology that had once bound her to deactivate the other children's restraints. One by one, the devices clicked open, and brilliance flooded the chambers as 6 unique forms of energy were unleashed. The ship's corridors filled with light of every color as the children used their restored powers. Some could manipulate energy itself, others could bend space and time. Together, they turned their abilities against their captors, who had never imagined their specimens could work as one. On Earth, the plant network blazed brighter than ever, channeling the combined power of 7 extraordinary children. The light was visible for miles, a beacon of defiance against those who would cage the innocent. Tom shielded his eyes but didn't dare look away, his heart pounding as he felt the magnitude of what was happening. Then, with a flash that lit up the night sky, the ship's containment systems failed completely. Tom caught one last vision through Lumi's eyes: 6 children, their forms glowing with newfound freedom, creating a portal in space. Their captors could only watch as their precious specimens vanished, scattering to different corners of the galaxy, each returning to their own worlds and families. Lumi's consciousness snapped back to her body, and she collapsed into Tom's waiting arms. Above them, a shower of purple sparks rained down as the ship retreated in defeat, disappearing behind the moon for the last time. "You did it," Tom whispered, holding her close as Rex licked her face encouragingly. "They're free." Lumi's crystal tendrils drooped with exhaustion, but her smile outshone every glowing plant on the farm. She touched Tom's cheek one more time, sharing not a vision but a feeling, deep gratitude, love, and the certainty that she had found her true home. The enhanced plants gradually dimmed to a soft glow, and the night settled into peaceful quiet. There would be questions tomorrow. The light show had been far too big to ignore. But as Tom carried his alien child back to the farmhouse, he knew they would face whatever came together. After all, family wasn't about where you came from, but who stood by you when you needed them most. And somewhere out there, 6 other children were free to find their own way home, thanks to the courage of one small alien girl and the love of an old human who had opened his heart to the stars.